Samantha Bozeman tried to close the door on her 4-year relationship with Maxwell Lartery, and in retaliation, he fired a gun through her front door, captured on Ring video, and killed her.
A grandmother locks her front door to keep her boyfriend out. He responds by firing 4 bullets through it, killing her instantly. Then he goes to Hooters for dinner. But here's the part that will make your blood boil. This 33-year-old man had been living off this 51-year-old woman for 4 years without contributing a single dollar to her household. The reason he killed her? She refused to get rid of her adopted grandchildren because he wanted to be the only person getting her attention and money. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an execution carried out by a financial parasite who saw murder as his only option when his meal ticket tried to escape. What you're about to see is the actual Ring doorbell footage of Samantha Bozeman's final moments. You'll hear Maxwell Larry's voice threatening to shoot her house. You'll witness the exact moment he pulls that trigger. And then you'll watch as investigators track his movements to a strip club and then to Hooters, where he's laughing and ordering food while her body grows cold in her kitchen. This case exposes a predator playbook that's being used against women across the country right now. Age gap exploitation, economic abuse disguised as love, and the ultimate control tactic of forcing victims to choose between their children and their relationship. Maxwell thought he was smarter than everyone else. The Ring camera proved him wrong. If you think you know how evil operates, think again. This story will change how you look at relationships forever. And if you're ready to see how a grandmother's courage to say no cost her everything, keep watching. Because what happened next defies belief. Samantha Bozeman wasn't supposed to be anyone's victim. At 51 years old, she was a successful woman who had built a stable life through sheer determination and hard work. She owned her home, managed her finances responsibly, and had created the kind of security that most people spend decades trying to achieve. But behind that success was a woman carrying burdens that made her vulnerable to exactly the kind of predator who would eventually destroy her. The 2 grandchildren she adopted weren't just family members she was helping out. These kids had been abandoned by their parents and thrown into a system that failed them repeatedly. Samantha didn't just take them in. She fought legal battles to make them permanently hers. She spent thousands of dollars on lawyers, court fees, and everything else required to give these children the stability they desperately needed. Those kids weren't just living with her, they were her purpose. She had restructured her entire life around their school schedules, their emotional needs, their future college plans. Every decision she made was filtered through one question: what's best for these children? That devotion made her incredibly strong, but also made her incredibly vulnerable to someone who understood how to weaponize her love. Here's what most people don't understand about Samantha's situation. She wasn't financially struggling when Maxwell entered her life. She was actually doing well enough to support additional people in her household. That financial stability is exactly what attracted Maxwell to her in the first place. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a provider. And Samantha's generous nature made her the perfect target. The age difference between them wasn't just about physical attraction. Maxwell specifically chose older women because they tend to be more financially established and emotionally giving. They're also more likely to overlook red flags because they assume younger men are just figuring their lives out. What they don't realize is that some of these younger men have no intention of ever figuring anything out. Samantha's friends later admitted they had concerns about Maxwell from the beginning. He never seemed to have his own money, never contributed to group dinners, always had excuses for why he couldn't help with anything that required spending his own resources. But Samantha defended him every time, explaining that he was going through a rough patch and just needed support to get back on his feet. That rough patch lasted 4 years. 4 years of Samantha paying for everything, while Maxwell contributed absolutely nothing except criticism and demands. 4 years of her believing his promises that things would change once he figured out his career path. 4 years of him slowly convincing her that her generosity was actually selfishness because she wasn't giving him enough attention. The grandchildren became Maxwell's biggest obstacle because they represented everything he hated about his arrangement with Samantha. They required her time, her money, and her emotional energy. resources he believed belonged entirely to him. When he finally demanded she choose between him and those kids, he genuinely believed she would choose him. That miscalculation cost Samantha her life and left 2 children without the only stable parent they had ever known. Maxwell Larry didn't stumble into Samantha's life by accident. At 33 years old, he had perfected a hunting strategy that specifically targeted women like her. Older, financially stable, emotionally generous women who had responsibilities that made leaving complicated. This wasn't his first rodeo, and investigators would later discover a pattern of behavior that revealed the calculated nature of his approach. The age gap wasn't about love or attraction. It was about power dynamics. Maxwell understood that women in their 50s often feel invisible in the dating world, grateful for attention from younger men, and more willing to overlook obvious red flags. They're also more likely to have established homes, steady incomes, and the kind of financial resources that someone like Maxwell could exploit for years. He wasn't looking for romance. He was looking for a retirement plan. His strategy was methodical and deliberate. First, he'd present himself as temporarily struggling but ambitious, someone who just needed a little support to get back on track. He'd move in quickly, always with promises that his stay would be brief and that he'd contribute once he figured things out. Then came the slow erosion of boundaries, the gradual expansion of what he felt entitled to, and the systematic dismantling of his victim's support system. Maxwell's economic parasitism went far beyond just not paying bills. He actively discouraged Samantha from spending money on anything that didn't benefit him directly. Her friends noticed she stopped going out as much, stopped buying herself nice things, stopped taking the small trips she used to enjoy. Every dollar she didn't spend on herself was a dollar she could spend on him, and he made sure she understood that equation. The psychological manipulation was even more sophisticated than the financial exploitation. Maxwell convinced Samantha that her success was somehow incomplete without him, that her life had been empty before he arrived, and that her role was to support his dreams, even though he never articulated what those dreams actually were. He made her feel selfish for having other priorities, while simultaneously contributing nothing to their shared life. But the grandchildren represented a threat he couldn't eliminate through his usual tactics. These weren't friends he could slowly turn her against or hobbies he could criticize until she gave them up. These were children who legally and morally deserved her protection, and their presence in her life meant resources that couldn't be redirected to him. His resentment toward them grew more obvious and more dangerous over time. The ultimatum Maxwell delivered wasn't emotional blackmail. It was a business decision. He had invested 4 years in establishing himself as the primary beneficiary of Samantha's resources, and he wasn't going to let 2 children interfere with his long-term financial security. When he demanded she choose between him and the grandchildren, he genuinely believed his value to her outweighed theirs. He had convinced himself that she needed him more than she needed them. What Maxwell didn't anticipate was that motherhood, even adoptive grandmotherhood, creates bonds that can't be manipulated away. Samantha's love for those children was stronger than his psychological control, and when forced to choose, she chose them without hesitation. That decision shattered Maxwell's entire worldview and triggered a rage that had been building for months as he realized his control over her was slipping away. The financial records investigators examined later revealed the true scope of Maxwell's exploitation. Over 4 years, he had consumed tens of thousands of dollars of Samantha's resources while contributing absolutely nothing. Her bank statements showed a clear pattern of increased spending on groceries, utilities, entertainment, and other expenses that directly correlated with his presence in her home. She had essentially been funding his entire lifestyle while he planned his next move. When Samantha finally said no, Maxwell faced a reality he had never prepared for. 4 years of free living were about to end, and he had no backup plan because he had never intended to become self-sufficient. His response wasn't emotional, it was practical. If he couldn't control Samantha's resources, he would eliminate her entirely rather than start over with someone new. February 5th, 2024 started like any other day for Samantha Bozeman. She had no idea it would be her last. The conversation that ended her life happened in her own living room, the same space where she had celebrated birthdays with her grandchildren and built the stable home Maxwell had been destroying from the inside. Court records later revealed that Samantha had been planning this confrontation for weeks, gathering the courage to finally say the words that would set her free. When she told Maxwell their relationship was over, his reaction was immediate and terrifying. Witnesses who lived nearby later testified they heard raised voices coming from Samantha's home around 6 in the evening. Maxwell's voice carried through the walls as he demanded explanations, made threats, and refused to accept her decision. But Samantha held firm. After 4 years of supporting a man who gave her nothing but grief, she was finally done. The argument escalated quickly when Maxwell realized Samantha wasn't going to change her mind. Court documents show he became increasingly agitated when she refused to let him stay in the house while he figured out his next move. She had made her choice, and she wanted him gone immediately. That's when Maxwell's true nature emerged, and the man she had supported for 4 years revealed exactly who he really was underneath the manipulation. Samantha's Ring doorbell camera began recording at 6:47 p.m., capturing what prosecutors would later call one of the most clear-cut cases of premeditated murder they had ever seen. The audio quality was crystal clear, and every word Maxwell spoke was preserved as evidence. His voice was calm at first, trying to convince her to let him inside one more time. But when she refused, his tone shifted to something much darker. The footage shows Samantha standing behind her front door, her hand on the handle, speaking through the glass to the man who had been living off her generosity for 4 years. She was firm but not cruel, simply stating that their relationship was over and he needed to leave. Maxwell can be heard pacing back and forth on her front porch, his frustration building with each passing minute as he realized she wasn't going to back down. Then came the threats that sealed his fate in court. Maxwell's voice, captured perfectly by the Ring camera, delivered the words that proved this wasn't a crime of passion, but a calculated act of murder. "If you come outside, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot your house." Those weren't the words of someone acting in emotional distress. Those were the words of someone who had already decided what he was going to do next. Samantha never opened that door. She stayed behind the barrier she thought would protect her, probably hoping Maxwell would eventually calm down and leave. The Ring camera recorded her voice responding to his threats, telling him to go away, that she was calling the police. But Maxwell had already moved past the point of negotiation. He had made his decision, and nothing Samantha said was going to change what happened next. The gunshots came at 6:51 p.m., just 4 minutes after the threats were recorded, for shots fired directly through Samantha's front door in rapid succession. The Ring camera captured the muzzle flashes, the sound of splintering wood, and the moment Samantha Bozeman collapsed in her own entryway. The footage is devastating in its clarity, showing exactly how quickly a verbal argument became cold-blooded murder. Ballistics experts later testified that 3 of those 4 bullets struck Samantha, causing massive internal damage that made survival nearly impossible. But here's the detail that made even seasoned investigators sick to their stomachs. The coroner's report showed that Samantha didn't die immediately. She lived for several minutes after being shot, bleeding out on her kitchen floor, while Maxwell walked away without calling for help. The Ring camera continued recording for another 3 minutes, capturing the sound of Maxwell's car starting and driving away, while Samantha lay dying just feet from the door. Those 3 minutes represent the window of time when she might have been saved if her killer had shown even a shred of humanity. Instead, Maxwell left her to die alone while he began executing the alibi plan he had probably been thinking about for weeks. The timestamp on the Ring footage became the prosecution's most powerful weapon. 6:51 p.m., February 5th, 2024. The exact moment Maxwell Larry decided that if he couldn't control Samantha's life, he would end it instead. The camera she had installed for protection became the witness that would ultimately put her killer behind bars. While Samantha Bozeman bled to death on her kitchen floor, Maxwell Larry was implementing a plan he had clearly thought through in advance. At 7:15 p.m., less than 30 minutes after firing those fatal shots, surveillance cameras caught him walking into a strip club across town. His demeanor was calm, relaxed, almost celebratory. This wasn't the behavior of someone who had just committed a crime in the heat of passion. The strip club footage reveals Maxwell acting like a man who had just solved a major problem in his life. He ordered drinks, talked to dancers, spent money freely, and showed absolutely no signs of distress or remorse. Security cameras captured him laughing, clapping along to music, and behaving exactly like someone celebrating a successful evening. While the woman who had supported him for 4 years lay dying, he was throwing cash around like he didn't have a care in the world. But the strip club was just the beginning of Maxwell's alibi construction. At 9:30 p.m., he walked into a Hooters restaurant and settled in for what he clearly intended to be a memorable evening. The restaurant security system captured everything, and what investigators saw made their blood run cold. Maxwell wasn't trying to hide or lay low. He was putting on a performance designed to create witnesses who would remember him. The Hooters surveillance shows Maxwell ordering a full meal, engaging in conversations with multiple staff members, and making sure his presence was noticed and documented. He paid with a credit card, creating a paper trail that stamped the exact time and location. He took photos with his phone, posted on social media, and did everything possible to establish that he was nowhere near Samantha's house when she died. Restaurant staff later testified that Maxwell seemed unusually talkative and friendly that evening, going out of his way to chat with servers and other customers. One waitress remembered him specifically because he kept checking his phone and seemed excited about something. Another staff member recalled him mentioning that he was celebrating his freedom from a difficult relationship. Those words would later take on a horrifying significance. What Maxwell didn't realize was that technology would expose every lie he tried to construct. His cell phone GPS data showed the exact route he took from Samantha's house to the strip club to Hooters. The timestamps on his credit card transactions, social media posts, and surveillance footage created an ironclad timeline that proved he had time to commit the murder and still make it to his alibi locations. The drive time between Samantha's house and the strip club was exactly 18 minutes, giving Maxwell plenty of opportunity to shoot her and still arrive at his first alibi location by 7:15 p.m. Investigators later drove the route multiple times, confirming that the timeline worked perfectly for someone who had planned every detail in advance. This wasn't improvisation. This was premeditation. By the time Maxwell was enjoying his chicken wings at Hooters, Samantha's neighbors had already called police about the gunshots they heard. Officers were forcing their way into her home and discovering her body, while her killer was less than 10 miles away, laughing with strangers and building fake memories that he thought would save him from a murder charge. The most damning piece of evidence came from Maxwell's own phone. GPS tracking showed he had been near Samantha's house at the exact time the Ring camera recorded the gunshots. No amount of chicken wings and beer could explain away that digital footprint. His perfect alibi had one fatal flaw. He forgot that his phone was tracking his every move. When Maxwell Larry walked into that Fulton County courtroom in March 2025, he still believed his Hooters alibi would save him. His defense team had spent months trying to poke holes in the timeline, questioning the accuracy of GPS data, and suggesting that someone else could have fired those shots. But they were about to face evidence so overwhelming that even they seemed uncomfortable presenting their case. The prosecution's opening move was devastating. They played the Ring doorbell footage for the jury without any warning or preparation. 12 strangers watched Maxwell pace outside Samantha's door, heard his threats in crystal clear audio, and witnessed the moment he fired 4 shots through her front door. Several jurors visibly recoiled when the gunshots rang out through the courtroom speakers. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Lead prosecutor Cassie Hall didn't just present evidence. She told a story that connected every piece of Maxwell's 4-year manipulation campaign to those final deadly moments. She showed bank records proving he had never contributed a single dollar to household expenses. She presented testimony from Samantha's friends about the ultimatum regarding her grandchildren. She methodically destroyed any notion that this was a crime of passion. The GPS evidence was particularly damning because Maxwell's own phone had betrayed him. Digital forensics expert testified that his device showed him leaving Samantha's neighborhood at exactly 6:54 p.m., 3 minutes after the Ring camera recorded the gunshots. The drive to the strip club took 18 minutes, placing him there at 7:12 p.m. Security footage confirmed his arrival at 7:15 p.m. The timeline was airtight. Maxwell's defense strategy was as pathetic as it was predictable. His lawyers argued that the shooting was a moment of emotional breakdown, that he never intended to kill Samantha, and that the subsequent trip to strip clubs and restaurants was evidence of his mental state, not premeditation. They painted him as a confused young man who made a terrible mistake in the heat of passion. But the prosecution had an answer for every excuse. If this was an emotional breakdown, why did he threaten to shoot her house before firing the gun? If he never intended to kill her, why didn't he call for help when she was still alive and bleeding? If he was mentally disturbed, how did he have the presence of mind to construct such an elaborate alibi immediately after the shooting? The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Samantha's daughter crying. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Guilty of aggravated assault. Guilty of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Maxwell showed no emotion as each verdict was read. Senior Judge David Emerson sentenced Maxwell to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, plus 5 additional years, plus 10 years of supervised probation if he ever walks free. The sentence meant Maxwell would be nearly 60 years old before he could even apply for parole. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Samantha back. The warning signs in Samantha's relationship weren't subtle. They were glaring red flags that our society has been trained to ignore or excuse away. Economic abuse is domestic violence, period. When a grown adult refuses to contribute financially while making demands about how their partner spends money, that's not love. That's exploitation. Maxwell lived rent-free in Samantha's home for 4 years, while criticizing how she allocated her resources. That should have been recognized as abuse from day one. The age gap manipulation tactic is more common than most people realize. Predators like Maxwell specifically target older women because they assume these women will be grateful for younger attention and more likely to overlook obvious character flaws. They present themselves as temporarily struggling but full of potential, always just one break away from contributing equally. The temporary struggle lasts forever because contributing was never the plan. Ultimatums about children or family members are the final stage of isolation tactics. When someone forces you to choose between them and people you love, they're telling you exactly who they are. No healthy relationship involves cutting off your support system or abandoning your responsibilities to others. Maxwell's demand that Samantha give up her grandchildren was his way of testing whether his control over her was complete. What could have saved Samantha? Earlier intervention from friends who recognized the economic abuse. A domestic violence resource system that addresses financial exploitation as seriously as physical violence. Legal protections for victims during the most dangerous period, which is when they're trying to leave. Most importantly, we need to stop romanticizing age gap relationships where the younger person contributes nothing but takes everything. If this case has opened your eyes to how economic predators operate, share this video right now. Someone in your network might be living through what Samantha experienced, and this story could be the wake-up call that saves their life. Subscribe to this channel because we're exposing these patterns every single day.
Bad relationship
Stories that
when
matter,
this happened.
cases that teach us, investigations that could prevent the next tragedy. Hit that notification bell and help us keep these conversations alive.